All right. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. My name is Lindy Wallet. I've introduced myself to several of you, but I'm the park planner for this project. I've been with the county just a little bit less than 2 hours, 2 years, but I've been working on this project for months or so already. I just want to tell you, just to start, that it really warms my heart that you're all here, whether you're happy or you're concerned, whatever, and I'm just excited that you showed up. So thank you all for taking the time out of your busy weeks. You could be at the demolition area, but you're here with us, and I really appreciate that. Just to let the online participant know that they can look on the website, there's a link here to find the image boards that we're looking at in the room, and also to participate in a community survey. Folks here in the room don't need to take the survey that's online, but anybody who's online can participate in that survey and share the same information that folks in the room are providing here. This next slide is about the online meeting, and Haley is with us. She's going to be running our online meeting, and she just dropped some information into the chat for folks who are online. If you have any questions, if you're on the online, please be sure to type them into the chat, and Haley will help you if she can. If not, those questions will be helpful at the end during our Q&A session. Oh, yeah. Paul. Paul? Paul? Oh, yeah. Sorry, we had a grand plan to turn the lights on. I'm just going to go ahead with the agenda though. So we're going to, I'm going to cover some introductions, a brief overview of the project. I'm going to touch on some of the community engagement that we've been going through for this project. It's, I think, a little bit different than what we've done in the past. We're going to talk about naming the park, and then Matthew, I'll introduce him second, is going to talk about master plan development. We're going to have a Q&A session, which it sounds like a lot of you have some questions about the part that you'd like answered. And then we're going to have the in-person exercise, which some of you have already started on before this meeting began. So I know the lights are going to go off soon, but I'm just going to do some introductions. You don't necessarily have to be able to read this slide. I just want to introduce some folks, some staff who's here today. David Stipe is the Planning and Development Manager for Parks and Lands. Raise your hand, David. Haley, you can clap for him if you want. It's totally worth it. Even more worth it, no, not even more. Equally as worth it is Haley Shannon. She's the program assistant from our communications group, which has been a huge help in getting this together. Kaylee McLaughlin-Burton is here as well, back in the green dress. She's our communications manager. Matthew Crampton with Environmental Science Associates is here. He's a landscape architect that's the consultancy firm that we've hired to help us with this project. And Thomas Fisher, who's been wandering around. I don't know where Thomas is. Oh, there he is, over there, where he should be, by the board. He's a landscape designer from ESA, who's also helping us with the project. And I wanted to introduce Priya Donapal. She's our new Deputy Public Works Director. So be sure to say hi to her while you're here. And I also just wanted to introduce really quickly Teresa Meyer with our Parks Advisory Board, and John Jay, who's also with the Parks Advisory Board. I don't think there were any other. Oh, Jim, I'm sorry, Jim Potts is here from the Park Advisory Board. He's actually the head park student. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name.
You're the next person. County Council.
Oh, I'm sorry, County Councilor Michelle Belfast. She's in her, not in her dress fatigues. Yeah, undercover. I'm so sorry. And then one more. Oh, and then we have two neighborhood association presidents. We have Bill Klein, who's the president of the Northeast Hazeldale Neighborhood Association, and Isla Westergaard Stanek, who is the president of the West Hazeldale Neighborhood Association. I'm not sure if anybody from Sherwood is here, but they were possibly coming as well. Right, so I just wanted to touch on a couple of other parks projects that we're doing. We're finishing up right now before we get knee deep into Minnehaha. But we are currently, these park facilities are all open now. They're not completely finished, so if you go there and you see things that are issues, don't be alarmed. But Cozy Camp Neighborhood Park is technically, I think, in Richfield. It's up in the Four Creeks Neighborhood Association. It's a brand new park. that we've worked on for about a year and a half for construction, and it's open to the public right now. It has a really neat climbing structure, some paved trails and whatnot to check out. Hawkinson Community Park is an existing park that we just opened a new 18-hole disc golf course on. It's the first 18-hole disc golf course in Clark County, and I've heard it's fantastic, even though I'm not a disc golf player. And then Philida Community Park over here on the west side, we recently opened the All Abilities Play Area, which was a long time coming. There's even a rainbow arch that took us a while to get stood up, but someday soon the formwork's going to come off and there'll be an actual rainbow arch there to love and adore as well. But all of these parks, we're going to have grand openings for celebrations for them in the next several months. So if you keep an eye out on social media or news releases, you can come and join us to celebrate the opening of those new facilities. All right, so now to the nitty-gritty of Minnehaha neighborhood park property. So this is a 5-acre park property that the Parks Department purchased in 2016 from a neighbor. We, at that time, improved it to a level of open green space. If you've been there now, you know it's a lot of trees. There's some nice big leaf maple and western red cedar, lots of willow, trails that are there. People are walking their pets. I think kids are playing in there as well. This nice cut through the neighborhood. Some wildflowers. And then I think we've improved it with a fence and a little parking area for maintenance staff. It's technically kind of, well, it's geographically located in the West Minnehaha area, but it's technically in the Northeast Hazeldale Neighborhood Association boundary. And in 2022, we worked to prioritize all of the 17 undeveloped park properties that we have and then how we were going to construct them. And we looked at, and this was one of the parks that we looked at, and it actually came up to the top as one of the highest priority for development. So we're working on the master plan development now, and we hope to construct the park in 2026. So I'm sorry, it's really hard to read this. You can find it online if you want to see it up close, but I just want to touch on public engagement a little bit. We've really tried to go a little bit above and beyond from, I think, what's happened in the past and trying to get people to participate, especially after COVID. I think there was hard to get people to participate. We're having a lot of only online meetings, so it's refreshing that we can all be in the room again together. But one of the things we did is we worked with our communication staff, we worked with the consultant and with neighborhood associations to determine a list of community organizations, including churches, the Boys and Girls Club, and various different groups to see who we could reach out to, specifically make phone calls, send out emails, distribute flyers, so we can get you guys all here in the room to help make the decision. So we feel like we've done a pretty good job there. There's a group that you know of that's in this area that, if you can look at this online later, that we haven't included, please email me or call me, and I will be sure to reach out to them and try to bring them into the process as well. So, nice, interesting topic of park name. So Minnehaha Neighborhood Park property really is kind of a placeholder name for this park. It doesn't completely align with it geographically, like I said, because it's actually west of West Minnehaha. But we're going to work on renaming the park as a part of this master plan process. And we really want to hear your ideas. We're soliciting your input through this meeting and through our online survey. We'd like for you to provide us with up to 3 suggestions for what you'd like to see for the park name. And then we're going to work currently with when we're developing concepts for this to bring to you in December. We're going to work on a final selection list that then you can come back and vote on again, or short list that you'll vote on at the second open house and also on the second online survey. Now, it's just a reminder that the Clark County Council has the final approval, 1 on the master plan, and 2 on the name of this park. So just because we vote on it, they may not approve it. Hopefully they will. So now I'm going to turn over to Matthew.
Hey, everybody. So I had the chance to meet a whole lot of you, so you heard quite a bit of this information that I'll share tonight. But for those of us who are joining online, please feel free to follow What we're looking at here is the first floor that you see also in the room with us today. And this is reflective of the site as you see it today. Some of the character of the site is really defined by some pretty dense vegetation. There's a lot of tree canopy on the site. Varying age, some of it's pretty mature, some of it's pretty young. So most of it is emergent and has just kind of been deposited by seeds and succession of trees that have been there before. The site is entirely fenced, except for some selective entry points in the northwest corner along 64th and 16th, and at a couple selected points along northeast 17th. Right now, the site is a pretty passive space. There's no formal circulation in the site. It's all vegetated, whether that's through some emergent shrubs or some lawn that is been taken care of by the county. I mentioned there are multiple access points, but there is no sidewalk actually leading to the park, which is one of the observations that we made immediately upon visiting the park for the site analysis that we've been doing. There's no circulation through the park, no sidewalks leading to the park. There's also really minimal improvements along 17 just to support access or parking. The proximity to the neighbors is pretty intimate. There are direct lines of sight to the adjacent neighbors. Along with that direct line of sight, there's also some sensitivity about sound. I suspect activity in the park would feel pretty close to the people directly around the park. Lastly, there is no, I mentioned circulation through the park. From an accessibility standpoint, there's no accessible circulation through the park. There's no paved surfaces, no care has been given to universal accessibility through the park. This next site is looking at some preliminary site analysis. And this is the kind of information that we do up front in a project like this to start to think about the programs that might be appropriate for the master plan here. So what you'll see on this slide are some of the things that contribute to the feeling of the park, as well as some of the spatial considerations that from a design perspective, we'll be thinking about when we think about what program would be appropriate to introduce here. The park, as I mentioned, is characterized by a lot of canopy, which means that there's not a whole lot of sun that reaches the ground plane. So there's a dense shade in the southwest corner where there's the most dense canopy. You see this kind of yellow amoeba shape over here. This is one of the areas of the park where sun actually does reach the ground. So in summer months right now, that's great. If seeking shade is wonderful. This is a great place to go and seek shade. Start to think about winter months. We might want to think differently about where shade is and where a different program responds to solar access. Right now, the park is one big bathtub. What I mean by that is it all drains internally to a low point in the middle of the park. So you can see here in the middle of the park, there is a big blue blob. In the middle of the winter, that's where all the water goes. And so if you walk there in the winter, you find that if you get wet there, there may be standing water from time to time. What we did learn is that it is not a wetland. We went through and did a wetland inventory of the site. It does not technically meet the criteria of a wetland. But as we think about design, it's a pretty great opportunity because those wet spots will be able to sponsor a different type of vegetation. It might be a way to characterize the park from a vegetation standpoint. The site is mostly flat in the center and east side of the park. And in the southwest corner, there actually is quite a bit of slope, which is also paired with some of the densest tree canopy. I mentioned a moment ago that there is significant visual access from neighbors into the park. So we will want to think about that from a sort of privacy standpoint and consider neighbors in close proximity to the park. Similarly, we want to be sensitive to sound sensitivities and what program is reasonable to have in close proximity to neighbors. There is, as I mentioned, a couple access points into the park currently that you see here denoted by these pink arrows. There also is potentially an opportunity to create a more formal access to the apartment complex to the south. As I mentioned a moment ago, there also is very limited parking not only for the park, but also for, I understand, for the apartment complex, and sometimes different users borrow from what parking is available in this neighborhood. So now I've had a chance to talk with a whole bunch of you about this exercise that we're doing today, which is what we're calling our DOT exercise. And I mentioned that currently no decisions have been made about what belongs to this park and what doesn't. First thing that the design team and the county are doing is reaching out to the community to get sentiment about what does belong in the park. And so what you see here today are a number of programmatic elements that are shared along with a sentiment or a priority scale. So what that looks like for those of you joining from home online is we have a couple boards that show different programmatic elements that have been selected as potentially appropriate for this neighborhood park. And the programmatic elements are paired with an importance. So these programmatic elements have been selected for a number of reasons. They meet code compliance in terms of what is permissible in a neighborhood park. They meet some spatial consideration for what would be appropriate in a park of this size with as many trees as are present. They also meet the county's ability to maintain, which is a significant consideration for a park like this. And the elements that you see here are not considered amendment. They are not going to directly be translated into what design is. We're just getting some initial ideas. So when you see things like play or different types of play up here, this exact image is not going to be what's developed in the park. It's just giving you an idea of what it might be introduced in the park. So we're just going to walk through these pretty quickly so that we have a little bit more understanding of what these elements are. If you have any questions about them, please see me or Thomas or Lindy and David after this presentation. We're happy to talk about them a little bit more. The first programmatic elements we see are inclusive play. The first one being nature play. This is some play structures characterized by natural looking features, things like logs, rocks, that would meet some really fun goals for kids. Next to that, we see some structured play. This is a little bit more typical. You see features like this in a lot of different neighborhood parks. They often come in a range of colors. Next to that, we see sand and water play. This is a somewhat seasonal type of play, but sand and water play can be used in the winter. This would typically is paired with a water feature metal like a pump, and the kids have the ability to pump water through a sequence of sand and little retaining walls to build little creative structures. Lastly, we see a play court. Notably missing from this play court is a basketball court. What we're thinking about here is a flexible paved surface that might have surface games where kids can improvise uses for it. But we're again trying to be sensitive to what programs would be reasonable in close proximity to neighbors. The next programmatic element are different trail types. So what you see here are a range of different trails. And this is a pretty exciting feature potentially for this park because we have a number of different vegetation opportunities and ways of navigating through different spaces created in the park. From an accessibility standpoint, accessibility would be incorporated in all of our thinking about circulation. So when we see things like paved trail or gravel trail, we would be thinking about accessible surfaces. Natural surfaces, we would be thinking about grades that are accessible, so 5% or under, up to 8% for limited durations. And this last option here, a boardwalk, is included potentially because, as I mentioned before, there are seasonally wet areas. And a boardwalk might be a nice partner for an area that is seasonally wet, and it would be a nice way to interpret that vegetation. Next programmatic elements we have are the different planting areas. This first one here you see is a habitat garden. This site has gone through a whole bunch of transformation from a cedar grove in many years ago to having a clear cut and then probably a blackberry grove into what you see today, which is a bunch of different vegetation with some sprawling lawn. So this would be the opportunity to introduce some native plants and try to create a little bit more vegetation appropriate for this site, potentially related vegetation that might have been found on this site. Next, we see kind of lawn and seeded area, much like what you see today. And lawn and seeded area could be potentially formal, might be irrigated lawn where you can go out there and run and feel comfortable that you're not going to step on a blackberry. It also often is paired with some non-maintained lawn that gets a little bit longer. And from a maintenance perspective, it means that the county doesn't have to come out there and mow every single thing. The next option that we see is ornamental planting. This would be some selective planting where you might have some seasonalities, flower beds, things like that. Maybe even some opportunities to learn about plants or interpret them. And then lastly, we have some tree canopy. There's a lot of tree canopy out there today, but this is potentially an opportunity to diversify that canopy. And again, maybe introduce some seasonality with color and or flower. Our next slide, we have some options for gathering spaces. First gathering space we see is just open lawn. This is a simple go-to. Lawn can often sponsor events of different size. It's easy to maintain. And it would be very similar feel to what you see out there today. Another smaller, more structured area might be a story circle where we introduce a small structure for people to sit and gather around. Even less formal would be just some selective seating areas, which could potentially be little pull-offs off of circulation paths through the site. And lastly, potentially some picnic areas where we might introduce some benches, accessible seating, things of that sort, to sponsor intimate gatherings for picnicking. The next elements that we see here are interpretive elements. And broadly speaking, these are just opportunities to learn in the park. So the first element that we see potentially is some educational signage. This might be lessons to learn about the history of the park. It might be lessons about the neighborhood. It could be lessons about the vegetation that's in the park. There's a lot of opportunities for signage. Thematic play. This is very similar to some of the structured play images that we saw a moment ago. Popular in the realm of designing for playscapes are thematic. So thematic means, like shown here, this one is kind of play structures that harken to trees. You might also may have seen in other areas things like pirate ships or dinosaurs. They're just kind of a big idea that gets communicated to the playscape. Next, we see a demonstration garden as an opportunity. So this is a planting opportunity, but this is also a learning opportunity. What we see here often is some signage associated with the plants. This could be useful for students visiting the site from various schools. This is also an opportunity to engage neighborhood groups if they want to take on, potentially maintain, or curate a plant selection. Lastly, we see artwork, and this is another way of engaging potentially the neighborhood community to incorporate artwork features into the park. And this would be, there's some selectivity, it's very subjective in terms of what artwork belongs in the park. But there would be a number of opportunities to sort of weigh in on the appropriateness of that. And what we hear back from the folks is that it is desirable. And our last elements here are just furnishings. And these are some of the infrastructure of the park that support different uses. So what we see here are seating elements, potentially including some bike racks to invite people on bikes to stop and stay over at the park for a little while. We see a shelter that might be an opportunity to have gathering events during hot summer months or rainy months when you want to seek dry space. And lastly, a drinking fountain. To support a number of different uses and often pair well with some of the other programmatic elements we see, like play or active spaces. So one other thing that we have here is a questionnaire that many of you already have. It is a yellow piece of paper that you'll find in the room with us today. And this is the opportunity to give feedback about anything at all that you don't see on our presentation boards, or any questions, any concerns, or opportunities that we are thinking about relative to developing this park. So some of the things we'd love to hear are, what are your favorite things about the park today? What improvements do you want to see in the park? And this is an opportunity, as I mentioned, to bring up things that you did not see on our boards during the dot exercise. What are your concerns about park improvements? What are things that you're worried about, either the process of design, or are you worried about uses in the park? This is a pretty broad question. And all interests will be considered as we evaluate the program before moving into design. And then lastly, we see here, is there anything else you'd like to share about this process? This is an opportunity for not only part design thoughts, but also feedback about what we're doing here tonight. Are there ways that we can make events like this better for you? Is there other timing considerations? Do you like doing it online? People that are joining us online, other things that we could improve about this process. And one question we do not see here that Lindy did preface a little bit is the park naming exercise that we're going through here. You'll find that on the questionnaire that's handed out at the on those yellow sheets. It is also part of the survey that those of you attending online will be able to respond to. So next steps, we are going to, after this evening, summarize the feedback that we received tonight, both from the dot exercises and any feedback that's written that's shared with us. And we will be sharing that at our next open house. One of our goals is to make this process as transparent as possible. And we want to make sure that all of you here attending online and in person can see how the feedback that we receive here does translate to design. That is a fundamental goal to this process. Next time we prepare for open house number 2, we will bring some initial conceptual designs to the community for a similar type of feedback process as this, where you'll be presented with some initial design thinking. You'll have an opportunity to respond to what you do and don't like, what you think could be improved about this process. And then after 3 conceptual designs are reviewed, we're going to attempt to consolidate into the greatest hits and assemble all the favorite ideas into one consolidated preferred design. Again, we will summarize the feedback that we received from open house number 2, and we will present a preferred plan refinement in a master plan format that I believe the county will make available for public consumption as well. Ooh. And with that, I will hand the mic back to Lindy.
Thank you, Matthew. Just wanted to back up. I just wanted to kind of reinforce what Matthew said, but when we move through these concept plans and through these steps in the process, and we come up with the greatest hits concept plan is one that we'll present to the park advisory board for recommendation for approval, and then we'll also have to go to council, and the county council will make will be the ultimate folks who will approve this plan. So, and before we move on to the questions, which is next, I know a lot of you have questions. I just wanted to promote another project that we're working on, which is the update to an existing master plan at Hazeldale Community Park. There's flyers for this project that are over on the survey table that Michael is standing next to over there. If you'd like a flyer, we are getting ready to put out a community survey to find out what folks would like to see on the additional 5 acres. There's 5 acres that there's 5 acres that are being included in this new master plan update, and our community survey is to find out what folks would like to have included in that and considered as a part of it. And since I believe all of you folks are in this neighborhood, you should certainly be interested in that project as well. So feel free to stop and get a survey. I mean, I'm sorry, the flyer if you'd like. Right, and so this is our questions period. I just want to go over a few minor points. I think there's a lot of people that have questions or things that they'd like to speak about. So if you could please be very brief with your question or your comment, and also please be very respectful of others who are here, participants that have joined us, and also staff. Online participants can type their questions into the chat. They're not able to speak into the room, so we'll read their questions aloud. In-person participants, folks here in the room, if you please raise your hand, and we're going to come to you with a microphone, and you can speak your question into the microphone. And if you're not comfortable speaking in front of a crowd, it's not always my favorite thing to do either. Feel free to grab that survey. I have some of them around, or that beige piece of paper that you find. Those are also the survey table if you don't have them. And you can write any kind of question that you want on there as well. Okay, so I think we'll get started. Haley, do we have, Haley, do we have anything in the chat? Okay. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like for us to discuss?
I was just wondering if the parking situation has been addressed at all, because it kind of feels like there's not a lot of parking in the neighborhood, and I'm worried that that's going to be a crowd of the students in the area.
So that's definitely something that we're going to consider as a part of this. We're in the very beginning stages of this, and we have witnessed with our own eyes the parking issues that exist in the park, I'm sorry, in the neighborhood, especially along Minnehaha Street and Northeast 17th Avenue. And we're going to be working with our transportation folks to, and development engineering folks to figure out what exactly we can do there. And we'll understand better what we can and do to improve that situation.
I just add that, with all of our park projects, we're required to do frontage improvements. And so whatever the class of the street is, and the park fronts, we end up doing curb gutter and sidewalk. And in the case of this piece of property, I was looking at the road classification today, and it's an 11-foot travel lane and an 8-foot parking lane. And so we'll, at the very least, do that. One of the things that we've been exploring with our neighborhood parks, which we typically don't have a parking lot at, by the way, is providing some ADA parking, because especially in the case of the Minnehaha neighborhood property, there's no sidewalks, as Matthew mentioned, leading to the property. So it's really hard for somebody who has some mobility issues to get to the property. I personally would like to be able to put 2 to 3 ADA stalls at every one of our neighborhood parks. So we're exploring those options.
And I think I'd also say if you have concerns about sidewalks in the neighborhood, which I'm sure most of the points say something, I'm not gonna, we're already getting emails from folks who are concerned. Please feel free to email us. You can email me directly, or you can email our general public works parks projects email address. And we will collect all of them and be talking with the folks about those issues. They're not something that we can address necessarily in parks, but they're definitely something we can be vocal about.
I meet monthly with the transportation manager, and we talk about frontage gaps throughout the system. We focus obviously on parks that create transportation pedestrian gaps. But in the case of this property, there's a home to the north that doesn't have sidewalk in front of it. And so that'll be a topic of conversation that we have with our transportation folks as we go through the master plan process on this piece of property. To try and make as many pedestrian improvements as possible to make the access to the property safe.
This is anybody, does anybody else have a question before I'll come back? Okay, I'll come back with me.
Hi there, my name is Asia, and I live in the neighborhood. We're just northwest corner up there. And I just want to say, is there any possibility that you guys will just leave the park mostly alone? It's a beautiful space. It really is a beautiful space. That would be my desire. So that's what I'm saying. Is that a possibility at all?
I think I'm correct. I think that's just asking if you're interested in
Asia Northern, 6410 Northeast 14th Court.
Thank you. David, anyone address that?
I believe Lenny mentioned earlier that we have 17 undeveloped properties in the part of the metropolitan area that we manage, in addition to our neighborhood and community parks. We purchased those properties with park improvement fee dollars that are part of our contribution process that the development community participates in. And so the intention with all of our properties that are purchased with PIF dollars, the plan is to either develop them as neighborhood parks per code or as community parks. I'll reiterate a point that Matthew made and that I've made to some of you. We have a lot of respect for this piece of property and the canopy. And We've already had an arborist look at all of the trees in the park and categorize the trees and their health. And we're committed to managing the property with modest improvements. It will not, as long as I'm involved, it will not look like some of our wide open parks that have very little trees. For me personally, shade is becoming a more important issue as we start to experience more of these summer heat domes. And so we do have the luxury in the case of this piece of property, perhaps to not have to build constructed shade because we have such good canopy cover. And so we're going to maximize that benefit of this piece of property. So.
Hi, my name is, that's weird, sorry. Anna Hanson, I live a few houses down from the site. My question is about the potential for tables and shelters and things like that. I personally prefer to stay as natural and green in the space as possible, but knowing that there's potential for those structures, what comes to mind for me is Leverage Park, which has some structures that look like they were probably really great at one time, and now they are very deteriorated and dangerous. And so my concern would be things like that are put in that they just attract vandalism and be left to deteriorate. So can you respond to that?
We typically don't put shelters in the neighborhood parks. Generally speaking, we don't put any improvements in a neighborhood park that's going to drive traffic to the park. We don't want to create extra trip generation. We wouldn't consider a full court basketball court in a neighborhood park because it drives trips to the park. And once we get into that sort of a conversation, then we have to go do traffic studies and start talking about parking lots. But to sort of reiterate my commitment to shade, I think our growing commitment to shade, in some of our neighborhood parks, we may put small shelters where there isn't already existing shade. And if there was a desire for a certain shelter in a facility, in a park like this, on the part of the community, we might put approximate to a play area. So it provides cover from rain in the case of this piece of property, not so much covered from the sun because there is a lot of opportunity for shade. We do put picnic tables and benches in our neighborhood parks, but it's really the whole intent behind the neighborhood park and the code that sort of drives our development of neighborhood parks is geared towards serving the neighbors, not the larger community, about half a mile radius. So we wouldn't put pickleball or tennis in a neighborhood park, generally speaking.
But can I also say that I think if you're concerned about us maintaining it, I think we have a pretty great operations staff who's taking care of all of our parks. And I think most of them, if there's vandalism that exists, they're out there relatively quickly to take care of it. You know, they have phone numbers that you can call to help us identify things that need to be corrected. And not that we're perfect at everything that we've done or do, but we do make every attempt to maintain what we built. Curtis.
My name's Curtis Knoll. I live across the street from Hazel Joe Farm. And I will vouch for their maintenance of their park buildings that are in shelters there. I think you were in this mark on one of the shelters this year already, but they're in pretty decent shape. But our park has a camp post, which is there all the time. Probably deter from some of the graffiti that might end up. So, and we're really happy to have it there. So that's, you got to do a good job. I've been up there, I walk them all the time and see the guys that are in there. So they do a good job. So Leverage Park is up to some yet. They're probably the way to not to this in the future.
Just a real quick note on camp hosts, our park hosts, excuse me, the Oregon State Park history, believe that every once in a while. So we don't have campgrounds, so we have park hosts. They're typically in our regional and community parks. Hazeldel's an interesting park because it's been around for so long. At one point, it was a picnic park in the middle of nowhere. Now it's got urban growth around it, and it really functions like a neighborhood community park. But the host has been there for years. And you'll also see in some of our parks that we're transitioning from hosts in homes in a lot of our parks to hosts in RVs like at Hazeldale Park. And incidentally, we will be re-roofing all of the shelters at Hazeldale Park in October.
Anybody else?
Kiki Stevenson, I just want to go back to what I was saying before about the parking, and I don't know if this is something that you guys would address. I'm not really sure. But going back to that, there is a lot of parking that is happening from the apartments that are on 17, where they're not even supposed to be parking there. And my concern is if you create any, you said there was an 8-foot leeway that was for parking. How do you stop people from the apartments parking in those spaces? I'm not trying to, point any fingers or anything, but I want to make sure that it's for the park and not for apartment dwellers.
We wouldn't enforce any parking in the right of way. They would make the frontage improvements and then it would be subject to first come, first served parking, unfortunately. That's just not something that the sheriff nor the Parks Department have the capacity to address. Right now, I imagine there is parking on the gravel shoulder, and in the winter, it's probably a little bit of a muddier shoulder. So you've got parking there, I'm assuming pretty regularly. So unfortunately, we would be improving it to meet the county's road standard, which is that 8-foot shoulder parallel parking.
Lee Grover on 65th Street. I think you've already answered the question that my wife and I had, and that was, is there any possibility of an enclosed meeting area for community meetings in this park? It does not sound like that. And differently than that, my own wonder is how, what's in place to keep any homeless people from dwelling in the park?
We have unhoused people living in some of our parks, and we have sort of an ongoing location and relationship with the sheriff to deal with those things. I think the Orchards Community Park by the highway is the first part that comes to mind for me because of the highway right of way right there. The parks that we've developed are visited, if not daily, by our maintenance folks. They're visited, 3 times a week, depending on the accumulation of garbage in the garbage cans. And so, actually having more eyes on the site and more people using the property can be a positive deterrent to unhoused folks picking up residents there. To respond to your question about community space, we do have the Bud Cleve room at Luke Jensen Sports Park on 78 that is reservable. You can go on the county's website and you can reserve that for meetings. And there's a potential in the future to do some sort of additional reservable public buildings, but they would generally be in a community park. So again, it drives traffic, creates the need for a parking lot. There are code requirements for meeting buildings. It's so many parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. And then it would, especially this piece of property, would chew up the ground really quick to start putting in behavioral circulation. So unfortunately, that wouldn't be an addition to this piece of property.
I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions, and then we need to be able to get people back out on the floor, or we have to give up our space.
Hello, my name is Gordon Block, and I just the rest of the park engineering points. They just decided if you like the desire of the natural setting of the park, it's sort of taken on a natural evolution in a couple of years since they cleared that. and it's carried in to the big, great development park. Lots of, I walk my dogs there 2-3 times a day, and somebody probably, maybe a dozen other people from what I can tell. Has that consideration ever been a potential part of park planning? Dog park?
So there are just a few things that come up every time we talk about park development. Dog parks is one of them. It's a very common request. It's also another facility that drives traffic to a site. People will drive there. We operate in partnership with a number of dog parks. I'm not sure what the total number is, but they're almost entirely community parks. And so we wouldn't likely develop a fenced dog park in a neighborhood park.
I also think it's permitted for the kind of code for parks either, and also a memorial dog park is not very far from the space around Los Complex.
I have one other, I have other concerns, but I'll just limit it to one at this point. I've watched the evolution of Hazelville Park, and I've been going to that park for years. And I used to walk through there every night, and I hear people snoring under the shelters, and I know that's attractive for homeless. I also believe the water, the trash, and the refuse are attractive. So, hopefully that's considered in the planning process as what does attract homeless, especially as we near the economic downturn. Hopefully that's a factor that you consider in the planning process, because currently we haven't seen any homeless take up residence in this camp, which is pretty surprising to me. And I think it's because of the lack of water, trash, and restroom. I'm not sure. But that's a real positive in avoiding that characteristic of society that maybe you can't plan for, but hopefully you can somehow include it in the planning process.
So restrooms are also not permitted in neighborhood parks, I believe, so you're safe there. And there should be traffic articles, probably one or two, so. And then possibly there could be a record found, somewhere. Okay, anybody else have one more question? I was gonna learn. To be allowed. Oh, question.
Hi there. Dr. Gordo, me and my partner Stormy live right next to the park on 717. Question is, right now there mentioned there's a chain link fence that surrounds the majority of the park. What is that going to be typical going forward, or is it sort of like stuck here?
Fencing is a really interesting topic for me. Working at different departments over the course of my career, it's either a standard thing or it's a thing that we shied away from. In this case, that 5-foot galvanized chain link fence on all non-frontage parts of the property is pretty typical for us. We would leave it in place, and in a lot of cases, we would end up with a shorter vinyl, black vinyl fence along the frontage, or in some places we have split rail fence. It doesn't hold up nearly as well as the vinyl fence, but yeah, fence is a part of our program.
And I think split rail fence is beautiful, if you're gonna have a fence. Anyway, so I know you have one more question. We do need to be able to make use of the space before it closes, but you're more than welcome to come up and talk to any of us. Write your questions on the paper, turn them into us. And that's been a question. We're gonna leave this screen up for the folks online, so they'll be able to use the QR code to link to a survey if they like, or find other information on our master plan development. You guys are always welcome to take a look at our website. We'll be updating it regularly. And one thing I forgot to mention is that if you, I think there was a checkbox on the sign-in sheet, but you want to be on our interested parties list, you want us to email you more frequently as we go through this process, please check that and leave us your email address and I'll do my best to add you to our list. So again, I want to thank everybody here, including Vancouver School District and Paul, who's helped make this happen for us. He's talking to somebody else, but he should know that we really appreciate all of his help. And thank you for coming, especially all of you for coming tonight. This has been wonderful. Please stick around, take care of the dot exercise, turn in your surveys, and ask us any questions that you have. We're going to need to be out of here by 8 p.m. Thank you.